Good evening, everyone. Dear friends, we're going to be concluding today chapter 16. The Alter Rebbe begins chapter 16, with a guiding principle in the life of a Beinoni. So this is one of the most, this is really one of the most central facets, one of the most central messages of Tanya for us and for our lifestyle and for our spiritual growth. What the Alter Rebbe tells us in chapter 16 is the importance of constantly engaging with ourselves intellectually and emotionally, which means the Alter Rebbe does not want the Beinoni living a life of routine, a life of rote, a life of going through the motions. That's an unhealthy Beinoni. It's a very vulnerable Beinoni. You're not healthy that way. Jewish health, spiritual health, comes by a constant conscious effort to arouse what the Alter Rebbe calls emotions, feelings, passion, excitement, a relationship with God. So, there's two ways to light Shabbos candles. One way to light Shabbos candles is that 18 minutes before sunset, it's 18 minutes before sunset, it's candle lighting time, you go and you light the Shabbos candles. You did it. Didn't think too much about it. You do it every week even, so it's already, built into your weekly routine. You don't even have to give it a second thought. And admittedly, this is nothing, this is something that we all this is something that we all struggle with, that our Judaism sometimes becomes very, very routine, very habitual. And something that we even stop thinking consciously about. Why am I doing this? Do I appreciate it? The beauty of it? And we lose touch with the meaning of it. And the problem with that is that the moment something happens, we can start falling off the bandwagon, right? We lose momentum sometimes because we're not consciously plugged in. So the Alter Rebbe says like this: Jewish life as a Beinoni, needs to have energy, needs to have motivation, needs to have an engine, needs to be power. There needs to be horsepower. Got to get some horsepower into your Judaism. How do you do that? So the Alter Rebbe says, let's work backwards. The end goal is action. The end goal is that you do mitzvahs, you do what you got to do, stay away from what we shouldn't be doing. Where do those actions come from? Actions come from emotions, excitement, passion. All of our actions, human activity, is the result of emotional push and excitement, some form of emotion that is making us do it. So, action needs to come from emotions, which means simply a Jew has to be passionate. A Jew has to be emotional. You got to love God. You got to be in love with God. You got to be in love with your Jewish soul. You got to be in love with your Jewish identity. We have to be in love with Judaism. You got to be in love with Torah. Yeah, that's a tall order. Generally speaking, the whole scope, the whole spectrum of emotions are referred to in Tanya as love and awe. Because those two really encompass all forms of emotions. There's the love, I want to get close, I want to bond, and then there's awe, which is the respect, the reverence. Those are the two sides of the coin of all emotions. Now, where do emotions come from? So the Alter Rebbe says emotions come through contemplation, through active, mindful meditation, which means you have to simply spend time thinking about ideas that are conducive to developing these emotions. And the Alter Rebbe says this is very, very natural. We are all humans. We are all biologically and physiologically hardwired and psychologically hardwired to create emotions. We are emotional machines. We create emotions. This is not something holy or spiritual. This is very, very human functionality, which is our brains produce emotional associations that we then live our life with. I'll give you a little example. What's an example of emotions? A good example of this process of where we are so capable of creating emotions is resentment. Let's speak about resentment. What's resentment? Resentment is when we all of a sudden remind ourselves of something that happened some time ago. Maybe it happened yesterday, a week ago, a month ago, 10 years ago. It could happen whenever. No. Like I once had like a little memory that came into my head of when I was bullied as a little kid. The funny thing is, I went and all of a sudden it popped into my head. I didn't think about this in 20 years. I don't know what. But all of a sudden, for something triggered that memory. So what then happens? We start thinking about it. Our mind contemplates and meditates and marinates in that thought. And we start getting in touch with those negative emotions. And all of a sudden, from the thought process of this memory, of this resentment, we start actually feeling those emotions again. We'll start feeling the shame. We'll start feeling the pain. We'll start feeling the anger. It's an amazing thing. You didn't feel the shame an hour ago, but simply through active contemplation, using your mind to think about something to the point that it literally spurned an emotion. You just gave birth to an emotion. So we human beings are very naturally emotion-creating machines. How? Through the mind. The mind creates emotions. In Kabbalah language, which the Alter Rebbe taught us about, our mind, the intellect, is referred to as the parents. Our emotions are the children. Parents give birth to children. That's biological, right? Brain gives birth to emotions. The mind gives birth to emotions. The Alter Rebbe says, a Beinoni, on the one hand, his perfection, where he hit the standard he holds himself or herself to, is perfection only in behavior, thought, speech, and action. But the Beinoni has to always inspire himself, has to motivate himself, has to be creating these emotions. And this is one of the most central pillars to the philosophy, to the lifestyle that the Alter Rebbe is trying to teach us. A Jew has to be inspired. Now, I want to say something very, very important. We usually tend to think of the word inspiration as something that is circumstantial, as something that is incidental, as something that happens to us. Like, when do you get inspired? Well, I go to Israel, I go to the Kotel, I'll get inspired. Rosh Hashanah, I don't know, or Yom Kippur, if the rabbi gives a good sermon, and if the cantor sings Kol Nidre just the right way, then I'm inspired. So we tend to think of inspiration as something that happens to us and is a little bit out of our control. The Alter Rebbe says, no, that's not the inspiration I'm talking about. We're talking about man-made, artificially made inspiration. You got to make it. Well, actually, it's not artificial. It's organic. Let it come from within, right? Organic inspiration. You make it from within. Don't wait for something to happen to you. Don't wait for experiences. It has to come from your own mind. And that's the second key idea of this chapter, the importance that the inspiration comes from within. Or in other words, the fact that you meditated, the fact that you contemplated, the fact that you made the mental effort to connect with these ideas, with God, with Judaism, with Torah, with the ideas that could inspire you, that's most important. And this is kind of what we learned in last class. This was the main idea of last class. So we have here the premise: the Alter Rebbe wants the Beinoni to be inspired, and that inspiration has to be something which is not circumstantial. The inspiration is something which comes from within. How do we inspire ourselves? It's easier on paper than it is in practice. Easier said than done. But essentially, it's very simple. Use your mind. Study Chassidus. Study it even more. Think about it. Spend real time just simply allowing these ideas to settle in your brain. Marinate yourself in these ideas. Think about them to the point that they really start moving you. And when it starts moving you, your heart will start reacting. You'll start feeling the emotional response. It's not cheap. It's not cheap emotions. These are very real. These are called developing holy Jewish emotions. Developing emotions that come from the soul. The key to the soul is the mind. We need to simply meditate, contemplate. Okay, but dear friends, that's what we learned about last class. In this class, we're going to be focusing part 2 of chapter 16 on a certain problem that seems to be quite common. And that problem is what happens when you work hard, you try to meditate, you try to contemplate, but the emotions aren't coming. What happens if somebody says, I learn, I really spend time meditating, I'm trying to get emotional, but I just can't get emotional about it. The most this person could achieve is the awareness that he should be emotional about this, but he's not actually emotional, which is a very interesting idea, right? Have you ever experienced that? I know I should care about this, but for some reason I just don't feel it. And maybe it even bothers you that you're not emotional about it. I wish I cared more about this. I wish my heart pulsed differently about this, but it just doesn't. It's an interesting condition, which means like this. You have the meditation properly. The mitzvah you have properly. You also do the mitzvah, but you're just missing the emotional link. So you act upon it. You do it even though you don't really fully feel it. The ideal is that we should feel it. When we go and daven, when we go and do a mitzvah, when we go and study Torah, we should really feel that excitement and that passion. It should be a very, very passionate experience, a very exciting experience, a very emotional experience. This is a condition of where you know enough and you understand enough that you know that you should be excited, but you're not actually excited. But you know that, in the words of the Alter Rebbe says, you appreciate the idea. Your mind appreciates, your mind discerns that it should be this way. It would be appropriate for me to feel this way, but I don't actually feel it. So the Alter Rebbe says, listen, if you meditate properly, and then you do the mitzvah properly, but you never got emotional, the Alter Rebbe says, don't worry about it. The feeling is not the main thing. You meditated, that's the main thing. You spend time trying to integrate this idea with your own self, with your own consciousness, and you acted upon it. You did the mitzvah, you studied Torah because of it. Even if you're missing the emotion, that's okay. But dear friends, at this point, I need to give you a little bit of an introduction. The Alter Rebbe is making a little bit of a deal about not having emotions. How important are emotions to Judaism? Why would it be such a big problem if you don't have emotions? We all understand why emotions are a great plus. They're a great pro. If you're emotional about Judaism, 100%, your Judaism will be a lot healthier if you're emotional about your Judaism. Can you imagine if you're actually excited to daven? I can't say I'm excited to daven every day. I'll probably be a little bit embarrassed if I told you how, what the ratio is between When I am excited, it's when I'm not excited, but okay. If I want to be honest with you. Okay, so we all understand that it's a very big plus to be emotional. But if you're not emotional, how bad is that? How bad is that? Are you just missing a little advantage? I do every mitzvah, but I'm not emotional about it. So what? Is it a big problem? The author says, yeah, it kind of is. So I want to give you a little bit of background over here. And only with this background, hopefully we'll be able to understand the rest of the chapter, what we'll soon read inside. Emotions, from a spiritual perspective, is not just like a little plus. It's not a subjective thing like, yeah, if you could be emotional, that's better. Emotions are extremely important. There's a statement in the Zohar, a statement from Kabbalah, that says every mitzvah needs wings to fly upward. Every mitzvah and every Torah that you study, any piece of Torah that you study, needs to have lift, needs to soar upwards. How does it soar upwards? Anything that goes upwards needs two wings. That's usually the way it works, right? Birds have two wings, airplanes have two wings. Okay, helicopters have something else. Won't get into that. So the Zohar says there are two wings to every mitzvah, which are the two primary emotions, love and awe. If you have emotions, your mitzvah has lift. It's a cryptic statement, a cryptic saying from the Zohar. A mitzvah needs wings. It's a spiritual process that Kabbalistically, your emotions are not just a nice little plus for your experience and your mitzvah, they're a necessity. And your mitzvah is kind of really stuck if you don't have emotions. And as the way some great Jewish traditional books put it, a mitzvah without emotion is like a body without a soul. You could do a mitzvah, light Shabbos candles, you could put on tefillin, put on a talis, give tzedakah. But I've got news for you. A robot can also put on tefillin, right? A robot can also light Shabbos candles. So what makes your mitzvah different than a robot? What makes a mitzvah more than just a mechanical act is the emotion, the passion. And that passion becomes the very life, the soul, the energy that gives a mitzvah life and gives a mitzvah lift. And every mitzvah needs lift. Lift is the life that you put into a mitzvah. If you don't put life into a mitzvah, that mitzvah can't, it can't really do its full effect. Now, why does a mitzvah need lift? So I'll tell you. When you do a mitzvah, that mitzvah has to be able to, a mitzvah is done here in this physical world, and then the mitzvah goes upward into the spiritual worlds. And that's basically, without going too deep into what the effect of that is what creates your connection with spirituality. That's what creates your connection with God when your mitzvah goes up. But for your mitzvah to rise upward, it needs your life. It needs your emotions. It needs the passion that you put into the mitzvah. And the key here is, if you don't have emotion in your mitzvah can't fly upward. And your mitzvah is a little bit stuck. And from a very spiritual perspective, from a very mystical perspective, emotion is very important for this reason. Your emotions become the lift that your mitzvah needs. I'll tell you a story and then I'll take some questions, but I still need to explain a little bit this concept. I'm just starting to lay down the basic ideas, and soon I want to give you a little bit of a better understanding of it. But just a quick story. The Baal Shem Tov, the founder of the Hasidic movement, Rabbi Yisrael Baal Shem Tov, he traveled a lot. The Baal Shem Tov was a tremendous traveler. He once visited a German city. And the German Jews, I don't know what city it was, they invited him into their synagogue. So he said, sure. And he's about to walk into the synagogue and he says, I'm sorry, I can't go into the synagogue. You can't go in the synagogue? Why not? He says, it's too stuffy. It's like jam-packed, stuffy. I just, there's no place for me. What are you talking about? Stuffy? What are you talking about? So the Baal Shem Tov says, this synagogue is so full of prayer. It's packed with prayer that I literally can't go in. So they thought that the Baal Shem Tov was giving them a big compliment. Can you imagine, right? Your synagogue is full of prayer. He said, no, it's not a compliment. Prayer is meant to soar upwards. There's a process of ascent. Prayers need to go up. They are set down here in this physical world and they start going up to the spiritual worlds. But all of your prayers are said with so little emotion that they're all a dud. They never go up. So he said, it's a problem. I can't go into the synagogue, which is, I don't want to stereotype, but I know, Elke, that you come from Germany, so I got to watch myself over here. But the German Jews were always a lot more stoic, right? Is that the word I'm looking for? A lot more rigid and dispassionate. And the Baal Shem Tov was trying to tell them, you gotta up your passion game. Davening is meant to be said with passion, not coldly, not coolly. So this is the basic idea. Okay, let's take some questions, then we'll keep on going further. Polina, yes.
Isn't the world of thoughts higher than the world of emotions?
Say that again?
Okay, so there is physical world, for I don't know the Hebrew names, then there is world of emotions, then there is world of thought, and then there is
world of intellect.
Then why do we need emotions? Can we just switch to the world of intellect and just keep thinking about it?
You're asking a very deep very deep question. And I don't know if everybody understood your question. That's a very advanced question. So you're actually asking exactly what is going to lead me into my next point.
Okay.
Why do I need emotions? Maybe I could just have good intent, right? My intellect, I'll think about it. Why do I need to be emotional about it? Maybe if I have just good kavana, right? You use that word. Kavana means I'll have good intent. Why do I have to be emotional? I'll just think the right thing. I'll have the right thing in mind. Maybe I won't have the right thing at heart because I'm not emotional about it. I'm not passionate. So the Alter Rebbe says like this. The mind does not have the ability to enter and become life within our actions. Only emotions can enter into our actions and become life for our actions. Let me explain that. If you think about it, our mind and the things that we understand and the things that we know are always gonna be removed from our very conscious selves. What do I mean by that? You could understand something and you could remain detached. You could remain personally detached from your knowledge. So for example, you could be a doctor and you could know the dangers of smoking. You could preach it even. And you could also smoke. Now, just think about it. How could that happen? Such an oxymoron, such a hypocrite. The doctor, who knows better about the dangers of smoking than the doctor? But the doctor smokes. We all know how that works. We're all very guilty of that. You could know a lot of things, and it has nothing to do with your practical life. Even think about the idea that things that we know of don't have any physiological effect on our life. I mean, when studying in a certain way is a very cold, study could be a little bit of a cold and a detached experience. It doesn't have to be, but that's the mind naturally is cool, right? Like we say, keep it cool, keep it calm, keep it level-headed, don't get ahead, right? The mind is very cool and a little bit detached from practical life. Emotions are very different. When you feel about something, you're not going to act against your emotions. That's very different. Emotions are very, very real. When we get emotional, there are physiological effects in the entire body. The more emotional you are, you don't only have those emotions in your heart, every part of your body feels that emotion. Your heart starts beating differently. You start sweating. You feel the adrenaline. You feel the tinge of that emotion throughout your body. Real emotion is something which is an all-body experience, right? The hear, right? Well, how's the saying go, right? Your hear stands on edge. You feel the emotion. We feel emotions. We don't feel our brains. When we study something, we don't have any physiological effect. We don't feel the study in our feet. We feel emotions in our feet. The Alter Rebbe says like this: the mind is too spiritual to fully become incorporated within our physical life. There is a certain gap between physical life, between our very, very material and mechanical lives, and the spiritual world of our brains. There's a there's a disconnect. One is too spiritual and one is too physical to really become enmeshed in one. The emotions is the great connector of life. The function of our emotions is to take the knowledge and the awareness of the brain and to bring that into our very down-to-earth life, our day-to-day mundane lives. Without emotions, by the way, this also clinically, somebody who has a hard time being emotional, what do they suffer from? They suffer from being detached. What does it mean being detached? It means you can know a lot of things, but in real life, what the mind knows, what the mind understands is just not, it's not translating into real life. The mind does not have the ability to become life for our actions. Only the heart and the emotions of the heart could become invested in life and give life to our actions. So the Alter Rebbe says, if you want your actions to have life, if you want your mitzvahs to have life, there needs to be emotions. Understanding is not enough. So this becomes a very big problem. So what happens if we meditate and we can't become emotional? What happens if we're not emotional? What happens then? But this is the basic idea. What is the function of emotions? The function of emotions is it allows the energy of the soul. It allows our spiritual energy to become invested in our mitzvahs. And now our mitzvahs are full of life. Our mitzvahs are not mechanical. There's me, there's my energy in my mitzvah. And because of that, my mitzvah can then have a spiritual ascent. My mitzvah can go upward. Does that make sense? It's a mystical concept, but this is the idea. So the Alter Rebbe addresses the student of Tanya who is troubled by this thought. If emotions are so important, if emotions are not just a commodity, but emotions are a necessity, right? If emotions are not just a plus, but emotions are critical, for our mitzvahs, how are you? Then what happens if I'm not emotional? So the Alter Rebbe says, if you're not emotional, don't worry about it. As important as emotions are, don't worry about it if you don't have them. What the Alter Rebbe says is, make sure you contemplate, make sure you meditate, and then make sure you act upon your meditation, which means study and get to a place where you know that you should be emotional, even if you're not actually emotional, and then act upon that mind's conclusion, the mind's resolve that I should be emotional about this. I should be doing this. I should do this mitzvah. I should study this Torah. And I should be excited about it. I'm not actually excited about it, but that's fine. The Alter Rebbe says, if you do that, you're okay. Even though there's a big gap here, even though you don't have the emotions to bring that energy, that kavana, into your mitzvah. Says the Alter Rebbe, God fills in that gap. And that's going to be the point of this final section of Tanya. Yevgeny is asking a very, very important question over here. When I say meditate, do I mean a still mind or focus on an affirmation, prayer, etc.? Okay, that's very, very important. In the world at large, in Western culture, when we say the word meditate, it usually means clear out the mind. In Judaism, that is not what the word meditate means. Meditate is the opposite. Be hyper-focused, super-focused, laser-focused on a specific idea. That's the Jewish model. So clearing the mind is perhaps a prerequisite, is the preparation for Jewish meditation, which means clear your mind. Don't think about bills. Don't think about what you have to do today. Don't think about the stresses of life. And then spend 5 minutes, 10 minutes, an hour thinking about God, thinking about your neshama, your soul, thinking about Judaism. Now, what are you supposed to think about? So that's why we learn Chassidus. That's why we learn a Maimer. We learn the teachings of the Rebbes. They gave us the fuel. They gave us the information that we could study, and which is tailor-made for us to then be able to meditate upon these ideas. And these ideas are there to inspire us and to give us the tools that we should use our mind to create inspiration for ourselves, to create emotions for ourselves. Right? Once again, this is not circumstantial, and this is not circumstantial inspiration. This is not circumstantial emotions. These are very real. These are personal. These are man-made. These come from within, not from without. Let's read. After all this introduction, let us read. Page 136, of the part 3 of the chapter. God fills the gaps in your mitzvahs. Says the Alter Rebbe. It was to this idea that our rabbis were hinting to when they said, when you have a good thought, the Holy One, blessed be He, attaches it to action. This is a statement from the Talmud, Tractate Kiddushin. And very simply, if you would open up an English translation of the Talmud, this piece of Talmud is saying a very simple message. What happens if you had a good intention, a good thought? You wanted to do a mitzvah. Like, for example, let's say you heard that there's somebody right down the road who has a flat tire, and you know how to change a flat tire. So you're like, hey, you know what? I'm going there. But 3 minutes later, you get there, somebody else already did it. You lost the mitzvah. Or you really, really wanted to do a mitzvah, and not due to negligence, not due to lack of effort, but you just can't do it. You really want to do it, but you just can't do it. And you feel bad about it. I want to do this mitzvah. Says the Talmud, you had a good thought. You really wanted to do it, but you couldn't do it. God considers it as if the deed was done. God gives you credit. God gives you points as if you did it. That's simple meaning. But let's look at the wording here of the Talmud. When you have a good thought, the Holy One, blessed be He, attaches it to action. That's a funny way to say that, no? Attaches it to action? What does that meant to mean? And that's what the Alter Rebbe says right over here. Let's keep on reading. If they, the sages, simply meant that God considers it as though you carried out your intent, they should have said, it is as though you did it. All right, what's the meaning of God attaches it to action? So the Alter Rebbe says something so powerful. Very, very interesting. The Alter Rebbe says, the sages worded this idea in such interesting language to also allude to a deeper idea, which is the idea that we're learning about. Let's read. The Alter says like this, but they had something deeper in mind. And here we go. This one little paragraph is everything I just told you for the past 40 minutes. Let's read. When your heart contains a palpable love and awe, these emotions become invested in the action of your mitzvahs, energizing them so that they can fly upward. Real emotions can become life of the mitzvah that allow it to soar upward. Emotions can do this. Emotions are capable of doing this because the heart is also corporeal. The heart is also physical, just as your other limbs with which you do these mitzvahs. The heart is a little bit of both. The heart is a spiritual force. The heart is also a physical force. And therefore, the heart is able to take emotions and invest them in mitzvahs, become life for those mitzvahs. It's just that the heart is an inner force for them. So it can invest its emotions within their actions, acting as wings to carry them above. The heart is capable of taking the energy of the heart, the emotions of the heart, and investing those emotions into the mitzvahs, becoming the life for those mitzvahs, and giving them wings, giving them life to let them lift above. But, says the Alter Rebbe, but this awe and love that's in your mind's discernment and in this deep subliminal place in your heart, but when the emotions are not real and palpable, but they're only mental emotions, they're only mindful emotions. Oh, the Alter Rebbe says if your emotions are only in your heart, in your mind, but not in your heart, the Alter Rebbe says these operate on a plane far beyond physical action. Your mind is too far removed from your physical life. And it is impossible for them to invest in the action of mitzvahs and act as intelligence and energy that will lift them to fly above. The mind can't give life to your mitzvahs. Only the heart, only the emotions can give life for the mitzvahs. And therefore, if you're missing emotions, your mitzvahs are really lacking. So what happens if you can't get emotion? Says the Alter Rebbe, impossible that is. Your mind can't give life to the mitzvahs. It's impossible until the Holy One, this is where God steps in. God does a miracle. God gives you support more than what you did yourself. Until the Holy One, blessed be He, makes that connection. God makes the connection. If you don't have emotions to make that connection, God makes the connection, fusing them with your actions. And the Alter concludes, this discernment of the mind, this mental understanding that I should be emotional, is what is called by the Talmud a good thought. Because we are not speaking of actual emotions, of actual awe and love openly in your heart. Rather, this is in the discernment of your mind and the subliminal place in the heart as mentioned above. So the Alter Rebbe says the mind, the awareness of the mind, is not enough to give life to your mitzvahs. You need emotions for that. If you don't have emotions, God fills in the gap. That's a gift of God to every Jew, that even when there's no emotions, God fills that in. So the Alter Rebbe says, what's important for you is to do the meditation, to do the contemplation. What's vital for a Jew is to study, to meditate on that study, and to act upon that study. If you're emotional, that's great. If you're not emotional, God takes care of you. So ultimately, we're seeing over here the Alter Rebbe's focus that for a Jew, it is imperative that we study, and it is imperative that we meditate, that we are in tune with God with the ideas of Jewish mysticism that could inspire us. And the actual inspiration is not as important. Okay, dear friends, we have 10 minutes left over here. The chapter concludes with two final notes, which are both of a Kabbalistic nature. And we'll learn them at least kind of briefly. Let's read the note, and then we'll also read the conclusion of the chapter. Two final, very mystical final points. Number one, let's learn the note. The note is a very deep idea. We'll learn it briefly, and it's okay if we don't fully understand it, okay? What's the Alter Rebbe telling us? The Alter Rebbe says that it's okay for a Jew to live his life and bypass his emotions. The way it's meant to ideally be is that we have intellect, we have mental awareness. The mental awareness creates emotions, and the emotions create action. Says the Alter Rebbe, a Jew could also bypass emotions. You could go straight from the intellect straight to action. And the Alter Rebbe says in this note that in Kabbalah it says that in creation the same thing could happen. Our internal structure, which is called the 10 midos, the 10 human attributes, correspond to God's 10 sephirot, God's 10 supernal attributes with which he creates the world, with which he energizes the world. Generally speaking, the way the 10 sephirot work is it starts with Chachma, God's power of wisdom, and the energy flows from wisdom into Bina, into Das, which are the 3 intellectual sephirot, into the 6 emotional sephirot, and down to the final sephirah, down to the final energy of God, which is called Malchus, which is the energy of action. And spiritually, the same process happens. Sometimes the energy goes straight from the 3 intellectual sephirot, straight to Malchut, straight to the final sephirah, skipping the 6 emotional sephirot. So the same thing happens also sometimes in the way God operates within the universe. So it happens within our personal world, which is what the Alter Rebbe is speaking about here. But this little note makes a little reference to the idea that this also happens on a larger macro level as well. So let's just read the note, and warning right now, we're not going to fully understand it, okay? And that's okay. So let's read the note. As is written in the Zohar and Eitz Chaim, that the Hebrew word for the mind's discernment, which is tevuna, is composed of the letters that form ben ubat, son and daughter. This is a reference to awe and love. At times, tevuna descends to become the intelligence between the feminine of Ze'er Anpin, that being the words of Torah that you speak and the actions of mitzvahs that you do. One who knows to ponder will understand. Okay. So as they say in English, if you know, you know. And if you don't know, you probably don't know. But this is straight up Kabbalah over here. That's the note. One final little note, which is perhaps a little bit technical, and we'll be learning this. What we'll conclude with over here is going to be, we'll be learning about this in depth properly in chapter 39, chapter 40, chapter 44. But for right now, let's not worry about that. We'll read it. The Alter Rebbe here is going to get a little bit, just dabble into the idea that there's actually, we're speaking about the ideas that mitzvahs need lift. Mitzvahs go up to the spiritual worlds. But dear friends, there are 4 spiritual worlds. What spiritual level do mitzvahs go up to? So the Alter Rebbe is going to give us a little note about this, but let's not get carried away with it. You know, when we learn Tanya, it's always very important that the main idea of every chapter remains the focus, and we don't get too carried away with the side details, especially the first time we learn Tanya. We have to always know that there's so much that we won't understand the first time we study. On the second time we study, we'll have so much more knowledge and so much more. We're already so well primed to learn these ideas more in depth. So let's just read it. Page 137. Says the Alter Rebbe, but this attachment by the Blessed Holy One, which joins the discernment generated by your meditation to your mitzvahs, in order to elevate the mitzvah acts and Torah study, which were brought about by your good thought, your discernment mentioned above. When God does this to fill in the gap, this has the effect of propelling your Torah and mitzvahs to the world of Beriah, of creation, which is the world of intelligence. Beriah is the second world, the second spiritual world in the chain of 4 spiritual worlds. So when God gives your mitzvah lift, God helps it go to the world of Beriah. Because, says the Alter Rebbe, because this world of intelligence, the world of Beriah, is the place to where Torah and mitzvahs ascend when they are carried out through intellectually generated love and awe, which is real and tangible in your heart. But the Alter Rebbe says, but even without any intellectually generated emotion whatsoever, either tangible or discerned, your Torah and mitzvahs can, in any case, ascend to the world of Yetzirah, to a lower world, through awakening the natural dormant reverence and love that is found from birth in the heart of all Israel, which is much easier to arouse, as will be explained later at length. So the Alter Rebbe says, we need God to help give us lift, to have our mitzvahs go to the world of Beriah. But to make it go to the world of Yetzirah, that we could do on our own. But okay. For this is a later topic. What's Beriah? What's Yetzirah? What are the spiritual worlds? Let's not be carried away by that. But with this, we conclude chapter 16. And dear friends, what's the message of chapter 16? The message of chapter 16 is that we cannot be Jews who are living our lives as Jews as a mechanical routine. Judaism can't be something that we are simply do out of habit. Our Judaism has to be dynamic and has to be real. The only way to make it real is if we are studying about it and thinking about it, meditating, contemplating, allow it to touch our heart and soul. And the Alter Rebbe says, even if you won't actually get emotional about it, it's okay. But the idea is that we have to try to create that conscious awareness, that conscious connection with Judaism, with God, with ourselves, with our neshama. And that's chapter 16. Next week, God willing, we'll learn chapter 17. Chapter 17 wraps up this whole conversation about the Beinoni and how the Beinoni lives his life. And chapter 18 is already a new subject, God willing. And with that, dear friends, we conclude. I want to thank all of you for joining. And I apologize for any of the background noise we have over here. You know, the great outdoors of Kalkaska, Michigan, but it's all okay.